Hello, my dear friends. What a pleasure to have you back in our quiet corner. I hope the world has been kind to you, and that tonight's story brings you comfort and rest. Tonight, our story takes us inside the cozy heart of Rosco Cottage on a crisp golden afternoon. It is a tale of small everyday mysteries, the quiet connections that bind a neighbourhood together, and a very peculiar pen that seems to know the needs of the lane before anyone else does. As we step into the warmth of the farmhouse, there is nothing more you need to do, nowhere else you need to be. Let your mind slow down to match the deep, patient rhythm of the turning season, letting yourself to drift into a state of total, untroubled peace. Take a long, slow moment now to let your body sink completely into the soft, welcoming support of your bed. Let your arms rest loosely by your sides. Release any lingering tension from your shoulders, and feel the comforting, protective warmth of your blankets wrapping around you like a gentle autumn mist. Let us share one slow, grounding breath together before the journey begins, drawing in a deep, cool breath, holding it gently for a quiet, restful moment, and now releasing it with a long, peaceful sigh. Let your eyelids grow heavy as the autumn sun begins to dip. The mid-afternoon was held fast in a beautiful amber stillness. Outside the windows of Rosco Cottage, a gentle north wind was sending showers of crisp copper-coloured oak leaves dancing across the garden paths. Inside, the great black cast-iron stove was radiating a steady, protective heat that smelled faintly of dry wood ash and sweet cedar wood. Berry and Caratina were preparing for their weekly walk to the village market down in the dale. It was the time of year when the larder needed to be stocked with simple, comforting winter provisions, and they wanted to make sure they didn't forget a single thing. "Berry," Caratina said as she stood by the scrubbed pine table, "could you find a pen or pencil? We must write down our shopping list before the market stalls close for the evening." Berry looked in all the usual places, but wouldn't you know it, he couldn't find one anywhere. Typical. He then made his way over to the corner of the kitchen where an old, deep oak dresser stood. In the middle of the dresser was the messy drawer, a legendary repository where the bunnies kept all the small, forgotten odds and ends that didn't have a proper home of their own. He pulled the drawer open with a soft wooden creak, revealing a wonderful treasure trove of domestic thingamybobs. Moving his paws carefully, Berry rummaged through the contents, the objects sliding against one another with a gentle, dry tinkle and a rustle. There were tangled skeins of rough hemp twine, smooth river stones polished by the valley stream, a small collection of mismatched brass coat buttons, dried lavender pods from 3 summers ago, and a beautifully preserved fossilized sea urchin. Deep in the back corner, tucked beneath a bundle of dried cinnamon sticks, his fingers brushed against something heavy, cool and metallic. He carefully withdrew it, holding it up to the soft amber light filtering through the window. It was an old, tarnished brass fountain pen. The bunnies looked at it with quiet puzzlement. They had absolutely no memory of ever buying or owning such an object. It felt surprisingly substantial in the hand, its brass barrel darkened with rich, velvety patina that only comes from decades of age. The cap was securely screwed on, and when Berry untwisted it with a slow, satisfying click, he revealed a beautifully crafted nib made of solid, polished copper, shaped precisely like the elegant, curved beak of a tiny songbird. Berry reached into the back of the cupboard and brought out a small, square stoneware jar of dark indigo ink. With a steady, patient hand, he dipped the songbird beak nib into the fluid, drawing up a deep well of ink into the belly of the old brass pen. Caratina smoothed out a scrap of thick, cream-coloured parchment paper on the tabletop. Berry began to write out their usual autumn provisions, the copper nib whispering against the textured paper with a soft, rhythmic scratch. He carefully listed their needs. 1 sack of rolled winter oats, 6 fat parsnips from the autumn harvest, 3 tallow candles for the long evenings. The indigo ink dried slowly on the page, shifting from a shiny, wet navy blue to a soft, matte twilight shade. Satisfied with the list, Berry placed the brass pen down on the table right beside the parchment. The two bunnies then turned and made their way over to the wooden pegs by the door to pull on their thick wool coats and wrap their heather-purple scarves securely around their necks. While their backs were turned, a silent, impossible magic began to stir in the quiet kitchen. Without a single hand to guide it, the heavy brass pen gave a tiny, subtle shudder. It rolled slowly across the pine tabletop, its shiny cap catching the crimson light of the setting sun. It came to a gentle halt right at the bottom of the parchment paper. Then, as if held by an invisible, mysterious hand, the pen tilted upward. The nib began to move across the parchment entirely on its own. It didn't rush. It moved with a lazy, elegant grace, tracing out 3 brand-new lines of text, right beneath Berry's handwriting. The script was entirely different from Berry's neat print. It was an old-fashioned, looping, cursive script that looked as though it had been written by a scribe from centuries ago. The copper beak whispered softly against the paper as it added 3 strange, completely unexpected items to the very bottom of the autumn list. 1 jar of pickled walnuts, a ball of thick, red cobbler's thread, a single iron linchpin. As the final loop of the letter N was completed, the brass pen gently lowered itself back down on the table, rolling into its original position and becoming completely still once more, its copper nib perfectly clean. Caratina turned around, her long velvet ears twitching as she picked up the paper list, folding it neatly into her deep coat pocket without looking at it. "Come along, Berry," she said softly, lifting her market basket. "Let's make our way down the lane before the dusk settles over the dales." The village market down in the dale was a swirling, kaleidoscopic tapestry of autumn abundance. The cobblestone square was tightly packed with rustic timber stalls, their canvas awnings flapping lazily in the wind. The air was thick and heavy, with a glorious symphony of scents. The sharp, sugary tang of bruised windfall apples, the earthy perfume of muddy potatoes, the rich, roasted warmth of chestnuts popping over open braziers, and the oily smoke of tallow torches beginning to blink awake in the gathering dusk. Berry and Caratina stood near the old stone market cross, the crowd of valley folk moving past them like a slow, colourful river of thick tweed coats, woolen cloaks, and muddy gaiters. Caratina reached into her deep coat pocket, her paws brushing past a few loose hazelnuts, and withdrew the folded scrap of thick parchment paper. She smoothed it out against the woven wicker of her basket, and both bunnies peered down at the indigo ink. In an instant their long ears shot straight up in absolute bewilderment. "Berry," Caratina said, her eyes wide as polished acorns as she stared at the bottom of the page. "Did you add these lines while I was fetching my mittens? I certainly don't remember us needing an iron linchpin, unless you've secretly bought a horse and carriage without telling." Berry squinted at the paper, his whiskers aflutter with deep puzzlement. There, beneath his own neat handwriting, the elegant, looping peacock blue cursive stood out like a row of fancy garden vines. "I didn't write that," he muttered, scratching behind his left ear. "And what in the world would we do with a jar of pickled walnuts? They taste like spicy old boot leather to me." Yet there was a peculiar comforting authority to the writing. The indigo ink seemed to hum with a faint internal warmth on the chilly paper. In the valley, when a mystery presents itself so plainly, it's usually a sign that the old ways are at work. "Well," Berry sighed, a small smile tickling his whiskers, "we have a few extra copper coins from our summer blackberry harvest. Let's trust the paper." They made their way through the bustling stalls with a renewed, curious purpose. First they visited the heavy, flour-dusted stall of the miller to fetch their sack of winter oats. Then they gathered 6 magnificent cream-coloured parsnips that were perfect for roasting, and 3 long, beeswax yellow tallow candles. With their main provisions secured, they went on a scavenger hunt for the pen's strange additions. They tracked down the old cooper, whose hands were stained black with iron rust, and bought a single, heavy, grease-coated iron linchpin. Next they visited the cobbler's apprentice, who sold them a dense, heavy ball of red, waxed thread that smelled strongly of pine tar. Finally, at the back of a smoky grocery cart, they found a dusty glass jar filled with dark, wrinkled pickled walnuts, swimming in a rich, clove-scented vinegar. With their basket now loaded with an incredibly bizarre assortment of treasures, the bunnies turned their faces back toward the hills, making their way up the winding leaf-strewn lanes as the first silver stars began to ignite in the twilight sky. The walk home was carried out at a slow, meditative pace, the heavy market basket swinging gently between them like a pendulum. As the lane climbed higher into the dales, the valley became wonderfully quiet, the distant chatter of the market fading into the gentle, dry rustle of the autumn woods. They hadn't gone a quarter of a mile before they came around a sharp bend in the limestone wall and found old Mr. Bramblewick standing on the grass verge. His ancient, high-wheeled wooden vegetable cart was tilted precariously at a terrible lopsided angle into the ditch. The cart was piled high with a magnificent tumbling mountain of his late-season harvest. Knobbly orange pumpkins, pale green cabbages, and strings of pearly garlic. Mr. Bramblewick was leaning against the wheel, his face as red as a winter apple, muttering into his thick grey beard. "Miserable rusted old spit of iron," he grumbled, as the bunnies approached. "The linchpin snapped clean through when I hit that rut in the lane. If I can't secure this wheel before the night frost hits, my entire crop of marrow and pumpkin will freeze right here in the mud." Berry and Caratina looked at each other, a sudden joyful understanding flashing between them. Without a word, Berry reached into the basket, pulled out the heavy, grease-coated iron linchpin, and handed it to the old man. Mr. Bramblewick stared at the iron pin in his hand, as if Berry had just handed him a piece of the moon. "Well, by the saints," he said, his eyes wide. "This is the exact gauge for a Broaddale axle. Wherever did you find such a thing on a Tuesday evening?" "The paper knew," Caratina said with a mysterious little wink. With a satisfying metallic clink, the linchpin slid into the axle, locking the great wooden wheel perfectly into place. Mr. Bramblewick gave a hearty laugh, tipped his battered tweed cap, and his cart rolled away up the lane with a merry, rhythmic rumble. A bit further along, where the old hedgerow met the boundary of the parish schoolhouse, they found Mrs. Stickletip, the hedgehog schoolmistress. She was a wonderfully neat, proper lady, usually found with her quills immaculately brushed, but right now she was in a bit of a fray, to say the least. She was kneeling in a drift of copper oak leaves, trying desperately to bind together a huge, heavy bundle of winter school books for the young hoglets. She had a ball of thin hemp twine, but the cold north wind was making her paws stiff, and every time she tried to pull the knot tight, the fragile string would snap with a sharp pop, sending the heavy leather volumes tumbling back into the dirt. "Oh, my feathers and fluff!" she cried out, her little black nose twitching with frustration. "The school term begins tomorrow, and this wretched twine has no more strength than a spider's web. If these books get damp from the evening mist, the ink will run, and the children won't have a single story to read." Caratina smiled softly. She reached into the basket and withdrew the dense, heavy ball of red cobbler's thread. "Try this, Mrs. Stickletip. It's waxed with pine tar. The wind won't touch it." The hedgehog mistress took the scarlet thread, her eyes shining with relief. It was incredibly tough, gliding smoothly over the heavy leather bindings. With a few swift, practiced twists, she bound the books into a rock-solid, secure package that could withstand a hurricane. "You are absolute angels," she chirped, her quills settling back into a neat, satisfied arrangement. Finally, just as the path opened up near the borders of the dark woods. They passed the tall, draughty stone chimney of the old barn owl, Alderman Plume. Usually, the alderman could be seen sitting proudly on his limestone perch, wearing his velvet waistcoat and lecturing the passing field mice on the history of the valley dales. But tonight he was a picture of absolute misery. He was hunched deep within his feathered collar, his large round eyes watery and dull, his beak letting out a sorrowful, wheezing sneeze that sounded like a rusty gate hinge. "Good evening, Alderman," Berry called out gently. "Are you all right?" "I am thoroughly, utterly undone," the owl croaked, his voice a low, gravelly whistle. "A dreadful winter rheum has seized my chest. My throat feels as dry as a desert, my wings are heavy as lead, and worst of all, I have completely lost my appetite. If only I had something sharp, something sour and spicy to clear this fog from my beak, I fear I won't have the strength to hoot the midnight hour." Caratina didn't even need to be told. She reached deep into the wicker basket and lifted out the heavy glass jar of pickled walnuts, the dark fruits bobbing in their rich aromatic vinegar. Alderman Plume's eyes instantly inflated to the size of saucers. He let out a sharp, joyful screech that echoed through the trees. "By the great oak, pickled walnuts, the old world remedy of my ancestors. The very scent of that clove vinegar is enough to make a poorly owl dance a jig." He took the jar and twisted the seal with a glorious pop, and instantly inhaling the sharp, restorative scent. As the bunnies walked away, they could hear the old owl letting out a deep, powerful, resonant hoot that shook the dry leaves from the branches. His voice was completely restored. With the market basket now lightened of its strange additions, and filled instead with the deep gratitude of the lane, the bunnies made their way back to Rosehip Cottage. Their walk home was a slow, dreamy mosey through the silver-lit dales. By the time the bunnies pushed open the heavy oak door of Rosehip Cottage, the night had grown wonderfully crisp, the grass outside frosting into thousands of tiny glittering diamond needles under the autumn stars. Inside the kitchen was a blissful haven. The great cast-iron stove welcomed them back with its deep, familiar amber glow, radiating a steady, protective heat that instantly made their ears relax and their chilled toe beans tingle with returning warmth. They set the market basket down on the scrubbed pine table. Moving with a lazy, unhurried cooperation, they began to unpack their true autumn provisions. Berry lined the 6 purple-topped parsnips along the cool stone pantry shelf, their earthy roots smelling of the deep, safe soil. Caratina placed the 3 beeswax yellow tallow candles in the brass candlesticks on the mantelpiece, ready for the long winter evenings ahead. Finally, Rosco lifted the heavy sack of winter oats and poured them into the dry ceramic grain bin. With the basket emptied, Berry walked back over to the table to clear away the ink jar and parchment list. The scrap of paper was still lying there, but as he picked it up, he noticed that the peacock blue cursive lines, the entries for the linchpin, the thread, and the walnuts had completely vanished, leaving only his own neat handwriting behind. The paper was clean, as if the magic had simply dissolved back into the fibre of the page once its work was beautifully complete. Puzzled, Berry picked up the old brass fountain pen that had been resting quietly on the wood. He turned it over in his paws, holding it close to the warm light of the oil lamp. The copper nib, shaped like a songbird's beak, was completely dry and spotless, showing no trace of the indigo fluid it had swallowed earlier. But as his thumb brushed against the tarnished metal cap, he noticed something new. The thick, dark patina had slightly flaked away near the rim, leaving a line of microscopic, beautifully etched engraving that had been hidden beneath decades of dust. Berry leaned in close, his whiskers twitching as he deciphered the fine, looping letters stamped into the brass. For the needs of the lane, not the wants of the purse. A soft, knowing smile spread across Berry's face. He looked over at the empty basket, then out the window toward the dark woods where Mr. Bramblewick's cart was rolling safely home, where Mrs. Stickletip was organizing her dry schoolbooks, and where Alderman Plume was hooting his clear, powerful midnight song into the starlight. The pen wasn't a tool for vanity or wealth. It was a quiet guardian of the valley's harmony, an instrument meant to stitch the patches of their little community together whenever a seam began to fray. With a deep sense of reverence, Berry stepped over to the corner dresser, opened the messy drawer with its familiar gentle creak, and tucked the old brass pen safely back into its corner beneath the cinnamon sticks. It would rest there patiently, waiting for the day when the neighborhood needed its quiet hand once more. A total blissful stillness settled over the kitchen of Rosehip Cottage. Rosco brought a heavy earthenware jug of fresh oat milk to the stove, pouring it into a small copper saucepan that sat directly over the dying embers. He added a gentle grating of fresh nutmeg and a tiny drop of sweet heather honey, letting the mixture simmer until a thick, velvety steam rose up into the rafters, filling the room with the scent of spice and absolute safety. They sat in their deep, high-backed armchairs right before the hearth, the deep stoneware mugs cradled loosely in their paws. They drank in quiet, the warm, spiced milk spreading a heavy, comforting relaxation through their bodies from the very first sip. Every slow swallow seemed to wash away the chill of the evening lanes, leaving their limbs feeling delightfully leaden and still. The moral of the afternoon was a beautiful weight in their chests. They had learned that the valley was a tapestry, and that sometimes the things we think we don't need are the exact things that will save someone else from the cold. By trusting the mysterious list, they hadn't just done a chore. They had kept the peace of the dales alive. The bunnies reached for their thick, heather-purple wool blankets, wrapping the plush fabric tight around their shoulders and pulling the comforting weight right up to their chinnigans. The high-backed chairs cradled their tired frames perfectly, holding them in a soft, unshakable embrace. On the center of the mantelpiece, the clock kept up its slow, predictable, patient ticking, measuring out the quiet hours of the autumn night. Outside, the wind made a soft, rushing sigh through the wild rosehip bushes. But inside, the fire was a steady, dying crimson ember. With the soft, warm breathing of his companions filling the room, Berry let his eyes close fully. One by one, their minds emptied of schedules and shopping lists, letting themselves drift away into the quiet, dark sea of an unbroken sleep. As you let your own eyes close now, and you sink deeper into the absolute comfort of your own bed, let these gentle thoughts wrap around you. My day is beautifully complete, and I can rest now. My hands are still, and my mind is completely at ease. I am surrounded by warmth, safety, and quiet comfort. I give myself full permission to let go of the world. I am perfectly protected, and all is taken care of. I am ready to drift into a deep, beautiful sleep. Let the slow, lazy pulse of the night carry you deeper and deeper into the quiet dark. The market is closed. The neighbors are safe. The valley is fast asleep. And you are entirely safe. All was snug. All was well. Night night.